So I am joined today by Matthias Mahr, all the way from London.
Hello, good morning in London. I think good evening where you are.
Yeah, good morning, good
Fantastic.
afternoon, all the different time zones. So we are going to be talking today about your new book, your first book, How to Be Moderately Successful. But before we get into that and all sorts of discussions that have come out of that, it'd be really great just to understand a little bit more about your career journey and I guess what led up to the point of writing your first book.
So I'm in London, as I just said, but I'm actually originally from Austria, and I moved to London in 1994, so a few years ago. Yes, I did my undergrad here, and then at the end of the undergrad, like I suppose quite a few people, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So
Most people.
in fact, there's a bit in my book which goes, well, actually, I would have loved to kind of wake up one day and go, I have this one thing I want to do, and I'll do it forever. But anyway, and so I went into strategy consulting for a few years. First in London for 3 years for a company called Mitchell Madison, which no longer exists, and then in Paris after that. In between, I did an MBA in the US. So I did a total of 6 years of strat consulting. And at the end of that 6 years, or when I got to my 6 years, I suppose, again, like many people in consulting, I started asking questions about, well, is this the right thing for me? Should I do this for a long time? Should I start doing something else? And I really got to the conclusion that I wanted to be in a business. I wanted to sort of run a business or part of a business and rather than advise, actually be inside it. So in about 2005, I came back to London and joined eBay. At the time, it was eBay
Oh,
UK.
nice.
So I'm assuming everyone's heard of eBay, so obviously selling and buying used and new goods online. And when you come from consulting into industry the first time, and some of your listeners, I guess, and watchers will have this experience, it can be quite tricky initially to figure out, well, how do I make this transition? And even what should my first job be? And often those first jobs are strategy related because you come from strategy consulting, and my job ended up being marketing strategy. And that had the word strategy in it, which I think the person who hired me thought I must know about strategy for marketing because I know about strategy. I actually didn't know a huge amount about marketing, so I had to slightly make it up initially. But I guess, again, in some jobs, you sort of, you're just happy that you get it and then you make it all right in the end.
Say yes, figure it out afterwards.
Exactly. It's actually worked out very well. So my job there was to make sure that eBay UK was allocating their marketing money in the right way and understanding the impact of the marketing that it has, so really marketing strategy and marketing effectiveness. But at eBay, I quite quickly took up different roles because eBay was quite a fluid organization at the time. I think it probably still is, with quite a few reorganizations quite regularly, which gives opportunities, I guess, in terms of being able to do new things. And there, first of all, I built a new team around insight, which is bringing together the analysts that have data insight and also market research from outside. So that was quite a new idea at that time. Nowadays, data is obviously a huge thing that's everywhere, but back in the day, it wasn't. It was quite a new idea. And I then moved into marketing proper and ran part of the marketing team at eBay. First the online marketing team, and then actually did brand marketing at eBay as well.
Ah, there you go.
Then after eBay, I joined a company called Eurostar, which is a train operating company. Some of you might have heard of. It runs primarily between London and Paris and London and Brussels in the UK and France and Belgium. And there really started to transition into commercial roles, which is what I've been doing ever since. And by commercial, I mean running the revenue part of a business or part of the revenue part of the business. And that can include marketing and did include marketing, but it can also include things like revenue and price setting, can include things like commercial strategy, some understanding of customer experience and what should the customer experience be like, the classes of service. And I actually even was responsible for the timetable for Eurostar, which I have a slight sort of nerdy bit in me and trying to figure out exactly when the train should run and figuring out things like actually the first early morning train from Paris was always empty because people didn't like getting up early. So we kind of got rid of that and started a bit later, some small things like that, which were quite fun. And the last part of my journey at Eurostar, where I spent 7 years, I did something quite different, which was to launch an entirely new service. And that was between London and Amsterdam, which has been running for a few years now and has actually been a really good success. That was a very, very different job because it involved working with people in Holland. The train manufacturers were in Germany. We needed some help from the French authorities as well. So trying to get all these different nationalities together which given my background was quite a fun thing to do. But some of those stereotypes, and again, some of that's in my book, but of the Germans and the French and the Dutch and the Brits and how they all work together and how they all show up were definitely still true, certainly at that time.
I did have a little laugh to myself as I was reading that section of the book. Some of the British ones definitely rang true to me.
Indeed, there's
As did the
yeah,
other
there's a whole
ones, to be
section
fair,
that one's
also.
particularly tongue in cheek, just because I wanted a bit of light relief. But when people read it, they're like, yeah, it is stereotypical, but it's kind of
Yeah.
true. So yeah, so that was fun. Then I went into my first true leadership role. It was about 10 years ago for a company called Handpicked Hotels, which runs 20 country house hotels in the UK. Really, really nice ones. Not sort of 5, 6 stars, but kind of 4, 5 stars. Really nice country house hotels. Where I was the revenue and marketing director, which I guess nowadays would be called the chief commercial officer, so responsible for that part of the business entirely now, and making sure that we had the right, I guess, price and ultimately the right revenue coming into the business. Then I did something a bit different, which is to set up on my own. I did some interim chief commercial officer roles for a couple of businesses. I did some projects because I felt that I just wanted to try out different things. So kind of going slightly full circle back to consulting in some ways, but for myself, which I concluded that indeed I had made the right decision and I preferred working in companies than doing consulting. So I went back into that. And if you're still following, then the last role I had over the last few years was at a company called Trainline. And Trainline is the leading reseller of train tickets in Europe. So think of it as the booking.com for train tickets, which if you're in Australia, perhaps that might not be something that that might feel as necessary. But in Europe, actually, there are quite a number of different train operators. And it's quite confusing sometimes as to how you get from A to B. So having a company like Trainline where you can just go, I want to go from Paris to Lyon or from Milan to Rome, and it shows you all the different options and all the different prices. That's what Trainline does. And they was responsible for setting up the international business of Trainline, or really expanding and properly setting up the international business. So in countries that I mentioned, such as Italy, Spain, and France. So that's what I've been doing.
Was it always that way, or was it originally just UK based and then it expanded to Europe?
It was founded in the UK, Trainline, and the UK business still accounts for about 3/4 of the total revenue. But it had over the years started to a little bit expand and certainly offer the supply in those other markets in Europe, but it hadn't really invested fully behind that. So this was really a building up a second part of the business, I guess, which is the international one. And also Trainline actually has quite a big inbound business from customers coming from the US, Australia, Canada, Brazil, and other places, who are coming for their summer holiday with a family, let's say, and they want to visit a number of different countries, and they've heard that trains are a great way of doing that, but they don't know exactly how to do that. So it's actually also got really good positioning for those sort of visitors, because it's a one-stop shop in English where you can buy everything in one place.
Yeah. And as you said, so confusing actually without it, to know even which website to go to for which train operator for which journey. So yeah, it is a really good platform and works really well.
So that's me. So yeah, I've done a few different things over the years, still looking for exactly the right thing for me. I mean, I think I've got now a general area of commercial, but I'm still sort of moving a little bit around rather than having found the one niche for me. But as you said, in the meantime, I've taken a bit of a sabbatical, and over the last 6 months I've written a book. That's the last thing I've done.
And what prompted that? Like, where did the idea come from? What was the driver?
The idea really had been brewing in my head for a long time, and I've had in my phone, in the notes functionality, I guess, quite a few notes on this book for a number of years. I actually, during COVID, had started writing a little bit of it, only about 10%. And really the idea came from the fact that I'd, over the last 5 or 10 years, probably more like 10 years, I've been doing more and more coaching with people in the businesses that we're in, sometimes outside of the business, just friends or colleagues I knew in my direct line, but also across the business, some mentoring schemes, etc. And I just did more and more of that because I quite enjoyed it. It seemed to work quite well. So people approached me to get some help. And I'd started writing down some of the ideas that I gave people. And I thought actually some of those stories I'd started writing down were hopefully quite fun and quite engaging. So over time, it sort of became quite a long list of things that I'd written down. I thought, you know what, actually, if I put my mind to it, perhaps I could put this into a book. And the other thing was I felt there was, particularly for people in their early to mid careers, maybe a little bit of a gap in the market for a book specifically for them. There's a lot of books out there, obviously, around how to become a millionaire, how to be a CEO, how to invent big companies, and they're all great books. There's some really, really interesting ones to read and very inspiring. But it perhaps makes it harder for people in their, as I said, early to mid-career to figure out, well, where should they go next? How can they progress to the next level before they get to that CEO role eventually?
Yeah.
And so those two things combined, I
Yeah.
thought, actually, I'll try and write it down and see if I can make it into a book. And eventually that's what came out.
Yeah, nice. And how did you find the process? Was it easier or harder because you had the notes? I can kind of see that going either way.
I mean, if anyone's out there trying to think about writing a book, it is very hard, no question. Partly because the writing bit's hard, and then once you've written it, you also need to get it out there to the world, and that bit's also quite hard because just because you've written it and you put it out there and you're very excited, no one's gonna, and a few friends obviously
Yeah.
gonna buy it, but you're not going to sell a huge amount of copies just by having it there. So there's both sides for starters. But coming back to the writing process, I think the hardest bit is to get a structure together, really. Once you've got a structure, which in my book they're quite short chapters, there's about 40 or 45 very short chapters that you can dip in and out of. And each chapter has a reasonably similar structure of a story and then an action. Once you've got that in place, and assuming you've got enough ideas, which I had, then it becomes easier
Yes.
to do. But it's really that early structure, because before you've got that, you sort of write a little bit unstructuredly, a little bit into the ether, if you like, and you don't quite know where it's going. So you need
Yeah.
somebody, an editor, or yourself, or a friend, or somebody, just to help get that into place, and then be quite disciplined about the writing process, and have time that you allocate, and have whatever spreadsheets that you track, and then have people that can read it for you. But yeah, once the structure was in place, it wasn't too bad to get it done.
And tell me about the title. I have to say, to me, again, it just sounds very English.
But
But tell me about the title. How to be moderately successful, career advice for realists.
indeed, so we talked a little bit before starting that it is quite English, both in terms of title and in the tone as well. If I'm
Yeah.
honest, so in other countries, obviously, particularly let's say the US, you'd go for how to be fantastically successful. But the reason I chose moderately, partly it's to be a little bit arresting and make people look up, obviously, and go, why? But I really feel there's some truth behind it, meaning that how I pitch this book is that it will get you to what I call the base camp of success. So if you think of success as a mountain to climb, this book will get you to the first bit of it, which again I'm calling the kind of base camp, which is actually a tough enough climb as it is. And
Yeah.
what does moderate success mean for me? Actually, the first part of the book is defining what it means for you. So I'm not defining what that means. But as a general idea, it's a place where you've got enough money to be comfortable. You've got enough responsibility to feel that this is quite good. I'm in a good sort of mid-level place. That's how I define it. And that could be just as an example. It could be maybe a head of department role or a senior manager of some sort. But again, that's really up to you to decide. It's not for me. And the first couple of chapters of the book are asking those questions. And as I said, this book will get you to this base camp idea by having a lot of little tips and tricks, incremental improvements that you can make that should get you those one or two promotions perhaps that you need to get there. And then continuing on with the analogy of the mountain, once you're at base camp of this mountain, then you can decide what to do next. And some people might decide they want to continue climbing the mountain all the way to the top. And that's fantastic. There's plenty of books for that. But the air gets thinner as you go up, right? So you might also decide that
Yeah.
actually you're not really up for that climb because it's all really, really hard work and you might not get there. And actually base camp's quite a nice place to be. The food's quite good. The views are nice. And you'd rather just sit there and watch other people sort of struggle on ahead, and you're quite happy
Yeah.
to enjoy where you are. So that's the next step after
And
that, I
and
guess.
you're still on the mountain.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you're still on the
Exactly.
mountain. It's not as if you're totally at the bottom.
Exactly.
I have to say, it really, again, it might just be the the Englishness of me, but it did really resonate with me, the topic. I think, sorry, the title, for the reasons that you gave there, that you see so many books that are, change your life, like be this, be that, and it's all so, quite over the top, and the biggest superlatives that they can think of. And that's not necessarily real life for the vast majority of people. Whereas this, as you say in the byline, kind of, career advice for realists did feel to me much more practical, much more real life, much more something that, a significant percentage of people can do and get benefit from. So yeah, I was just interested because I could imagine a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot of people, perhaps more so our American friends, being a bit confused by the
Yeah, it's also
title.
interesting
Of
because
like, why would you want that?
yeah, it's also in my own career, just for what it's worth, because I've taken this time out to write it, but I do intend to go back and back into corporate life. And I have had a few discussions about that, interviews, early discussions. People are like, hang on, so does that mean you only want to be moderately successful? I don't think we want people here who, just want to be moderately successful. So it has been a bit of a risk for my own career as well, I suppose. But I thought it was worth it, and it is my personality, as the things you just mentioned, in the sense that I'm about action, I'm about making probably smaller incremental improvements, but a lot of them, which eventually will add up, rather than this
Yeah,
chasing this sort of one huge thing. So I guess
yeah,
every author in some ways puts
yeah,
their personality into the books that they write. So that's mine in
yeah,
there.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned the structure there and lots of kind of 40 or so, I think you said, sort of short, sharp chapters, again, kind of really, really practical. There were a few that kind of stood out to me that I thought it'd be interesting to kind of chat in a bit more detail about and understand some of the stories behind them. Again, as you said, every chapter's got a real life story in, which I also liked. A big percentage or a pretty significant chunk of the book is around working with other people. I think for the obvious the
Yeah,
obvious
it's a whole
reasons.
section.
We Yeah, there's not many jobs out there where you don't have to work with other people, and other people bring lots of positives with them. They also bring some challenges with them. I guess that's just life, but yeah, tell me about your approach to working with other people and how you've kind of thought about those chapters.
So yes, working with other people is clearly a fundamental part of being successful in any job, or certainly the vast majority of jobs. But that's why it's a really important part of the book as well. And the way I've structured is I'm starting with the fundamentals of understanding other people and where they're coming from, because I think that's got to be the first part of being able to deal with them well, is knowing what drives them, why do they act the way they act, what are their objectives. And there's three parts to that in the book. The first one is what their role is, which again is kind of obvious, right? Are they in legal? Are they in finance? Are they in commercial, marketing, sales, wherever they may be? And people in those departments will have very different reasons for operating the way that they are. And if you, let's say, are in sales and marketing and you are annoyed at the legal person who keeps blocking your project, and you just sit there going, why do they not understand how important this is? That can be quite
Can't imagine
frustrating.
why you chose that example.
Well, it happens quite a lot. But you've got to understand that legal does it for a reason. They're not generally doing it
Yeah.
because they want to be annoying. They're doing it because their job is to make sure that you don't get the company or the CEO, whoever, in trouble. So I think it's quite
Yeah.
basic. But if you don't step back for a minute and say, well, hang on, let me just understand what drives them, what are their objectives, what are their KPIs, and what role do they have, it'll make it a lot harder, because you'll just end up headbutting with quite a few people. So the department, some of the fundamental drivers as who they are as a person can be sometimes quite important to find out. Which culture they're from, we talked about that a little bit before, can influence how they act as well. So that's the first part, doing that inventory of, I suppose, why do people act the way they are, and also their personality profiles, which I've got a bit early in the book as well. So things like, it's called the color wheel, or the Myers-Briggs test, which some of you might have heard of, which is really about the preferences and the way of operating of different people. Are you more an ideas person, more a numbers person? Are you more of an introvert, more of an extrovert? Are you more sort of thinking or feeling, that sort of thing? So there's a lot of different ways of being able to understand people. And I think if you take the time sometimes to step back, and rather than going, oh, this person's just difficult, you try and figure out, well, why are they doing what they're doing? That can be a lot easier. So that's the first part of the section of working with people, is to understand them well. And then there's some specific examples about working with certain types of people after that.
It's such a, as you say, it's a relatively simple point, but with so much complexity underneath it, because I think it's just human nature, isn't it? It's very easy to see things from our own perspective. We're used to that, and someone else's perspective to us might appear difficult, or like they're doing it on purpose, or they're just out to annoy me, or all of the things we say in our, hopefully in our own heads most of the
Exactly. Well,
time. Uh,
I've got one chapter in there which is called "Working with Idiots," which again is purposefully a little bit pushing it in terms of the title, but an idiot is defined as you wish to define it. So it's just somebody who would, people who annoy you at work, I guess. Which there will always be some people, right, that you're like, oh, I can't believe I have to work with X, Y, Z person again. And again, the first part of that chapter actually is, let's figure out, are they really idiots, or are you two just very different? And as a result, you just don't
yeah.
see life the same way, and quite quickly you've sort of bashed heads, and then ever since then you haven't liked each other. So I'm pretty convinced that when you make your list of idiots, which is my action, make a list, that let's say half of them, there's actually just something underlying that's quite different.
Yeah.
There will be some people left that you still think are idiots at the end of that. So I'm not promising that magically, no one's going to ever annoy you, but I think you can reduce the number in that box by thinking through it a little bit. And then you still need to figure out what to do with the remaining ones. And broadly, I'm suggesting either to just ignore them if possible, or to find some sort of accommodation where maybe you've got a third bit that you can both work towards together. But yeah, so it's just understanding that. And I think once you get into it, if you move from the, oh, these people are annoying sort of mindset to actually let me understand where they're coming from, I think it can be quite fun, the sort of psychology for beginners, if you like. I think
Absolutely.
it can be quite an interesting game of really trying to get under the skin of what drives people.
Yeah, totally. And I think it just changes I'm going to say vibe. I can't think of a better word than that, but it changes your approach in your head in another lifetime, whatever it would be, 25 years ago or something. I actually worked with the disc behavioral profile, the color wheel that you mentioned there, and used to do a lot of training with it. We used to do it for team building, sales, influencing, but all from the basis of understand yourself and your own drivers, but also understand those things in other people. And it was so fascinating to see the kind of the aha moments for people when they would realize that the person that they were clashing with, that they probably thought was an idiot, was actually just on the opposite side of the model to them. And it wasn't that they were an idiot, it was just that they were very different in the way that they went about things. And then the sort of the second light bulb that would go on of, well, if I think that about them, then they must think that about me. And suddenly there's this whole new level of understanding, and also kind of a path forward to say, well, if I adapt a little bit and you adapt a little bit, then actually we can meet in the middle, and hopefully it won't be such a painful a painful interaction going forward. But yeah, I'm with you. I find stuff like that just super fascinating. I think people in general are infinitely fascinating, and why they do the things that they do. The other part of that, working with people, that I thought was really interesting, and one that can often, I think, be overlooked, is how to work more effectively with your boss. And obviously they have a responsibility to manage you, but there is an element of a two-way street there. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
I agree, and I actually called it managing your boss because, as you said, clearly they're your manager, you're not their manager. Nonetheless, I think there's a lot you can do to make that relationship better and also work for you really well. And then have what I've called this sort of adult to adult relationship, as opposed to what can sometimes happen as more the parent-child relationship, where they tell you what to do and you just do it, which sometimes can be useful if they're very senior and you want to learn, but generally it's much better to have that sort of open relationship. And again, it starts with understanding them and figuring out what do they want out of their role currently. Do they want to get promoted? Do they want to be seen to be really good, or whatever it is that they want to do? So understand that piece. And then I think in some instances also swallowing your pride a little bit and making it work for you that way, because bosses like to be made to look good. So if you can do that, then that's always a bonus. So that's one thing. and then also using them to achieve your goals ultimately. And sometimes, again, that can be, let's say you want something to be achieved, you try and convince your boss to do this project or whatever it is, and sometimes they might just
Mm.
absorb it and pretend that it was their own idea and sort of sell it on to the next person. And you might think, well, how dare they? That's just outrageous. That's my idea. But sometimes if the idea ultimately happens and your project gets funded or whatever, then sometimes just accept that that's part of the deal and swallow your pride and sort of get on
Yeah,
with it. Not always, clearly. You don't want to always be in the shadows, but
sure.
sometimes it might just be better to do that. So it's just finding the right ways to again understand and then make work for you that relationship, and you should get a lot back in return from that.
A theme that comes up quite a lot actually, and I think it specifically also comes up in that bit, is the around being
Hmm.
proactive in different scenarios. And I think the example you gave there also made me think of that, if it's actually not just kind of sitting back and just letting your, again, it sounds strange to say your boss drive the car, because yes, they're the boss, but if you can be proactive in the things that you're looking for, of, you know, well, actually in the next year or 2 years, I'd like to get here. How, you know, is it possible that you can help me work towards that? And actually be more proactive in the way that you approach that relationship and some of the goals that you've kind of got around that. But yeah, I think it's one that people don't sort of naturally think of, that one, but can have such a huge
It's
impact, as
probably the
as
yeah,
you
it's probably the
say.
most important relationship you have at work normally. So
Yeah.
making that work for you and making sure it's a good relationship and that you get as much as you can out of it is really important. And you mentioned proactivity; it's really a theme throughout the entire book. And again, my
Mm,
personality, I think you just have to be proactive if you want to learn, if you want to advance your career. Hopefully, if you're someone who would pick up a book like that, so you want to be proactive. So that's a good start. But yeah, not a lot's going to come to you naturally. Some might, and sometimes you need a bit of luck at work as well. So,
yeah.
sometimes a role might
Yeah.
open up and you can just get it, or sometimes somebody might leave, or whatever might happen. So, there's certainly going to be a bit of luck in life. But, but even if that luck happens, you need to proactively grab it. So, I think that's a really important key tenet of the whole thing is make your own luck ultimately and grab the
Yeah.
opportunities, ask for things,
Yeah.
don't wait for things to happen to you. Don't kind of complain that you've been overlooked for this, that, and the other. Even if it's true, it's not really going to make any difference if you sit there complaining. Well, I feel good for a day or two. So I'm not
No,
saying
and it's
never
probably
do
going to
it.
make it
Sometimes it's
worse.
useful, but but ultimately you need to go out there and ask for things and grab the opportunities that are there and make your own opportunities. So I think that's a really important part of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on that proactive part, the story that I've got in my mind, I think the title of that section was Speak Up, but I've got the example of the Austrians in the ski lift, or,
Yeah.
or trying to get on the ski lift and kind of barging people out the way. I have actually experienced that firsthand as well, and it's true. I learned
Yeah.
pretty quick that I couldn't just stand back and queue. Like, I had to get in and had to use my pole to, you know, block the people on either side of me.
Yeah, so the Austrians might be a bit far along
Yeah, tell
along the
me.
edge of the proactivity sometimes, where actually, talking about the cultural clashes, having first turned up in the UK, where it's very much the opposite, and it's all the politeness and please no after you, no no after you. It can be quite an interesting culture clash when you come from a place like Austria, where it's not. You know, I suppose queuing at bus stops is one of the examples. In Austria, there'll just be a sort of circle around the stop, and everyone will try and will get on. Whereas in the UK, it's a sort of nice line of whoever got there first. So I'm not saying, and clearly there's a line in all these things, right? So I'm not saying be rude. I'm not saying get your elbows out actively and push people out the way. And you have to obviously find the right balance of doing that. But equally, if you just sit there and go, no, no, after you, no, no, after you, then that's also not going to
Yeah.
get you on the bus either. So it's finding that right
Yeah.
balance of grabbing opportunities and being proactive without obviously pushing it too far.
There's this thing, and I did it myself for many years, and probably still was doing it up until not that long ago, if I'm honest. But that idea that my work will speak for itself,
Mm.
and like that's good enough. Like, if I'm doing a great job and I'm smashing it and I'm doing all this stuff, and you know, if my team's happy and all of those things, that people will see that and I will be noticed for that. And yes, like, that sounds nice. But the reality is that I reckon, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be enough. That you kind of do need to put your hand up a bit. You do need to speak up. You do need to, push yourself to the front of the queue, whatever analogy we're we're going to use a little bit. And again, be proactive in kind of advocating for yourself. And I think certainly for people earlier in their career, that's a really useful piece of advice, that just doing a great job probably isn't going to be enough, unfortunately. As much as, we'd like it to be in kind of Pollyanna world, it's probably not true.
Yeah, that is true. And people who ask for more will ultimately get a bit more on
Yeah,
balance. Also on things like
yeah.
promotions, which we're probably going to come to in a minute, but same thing. If you just sit there and, as you just said, go, I've done a great job, therefore I'll get promoted, that may work. But if you work at it and use the processes and so on, which you can maybe speak in a minute, then you'll just increase your chances of that happening.
Yeah. Do you want to do that now, seeing as we've brought it up? Because you did have a really kind of structured approach to that in
Yeah, very
the
happy to.
in the
So,
book.
so
So
I've got two parts to thinking about the promotions piece. One part's quite boring but quite important, and the other bit's a bit more fun. So the boring bit is the process that I've mentioned, and especially in larger companies, there will be quite structured promotions processes in terms of what time of the year do they happen. Uh, so when do they happen? Who gets to decide? Typically, your manager is the first level, so they have to support your promotion, but they are rarely the only person who is in the decision-making process, especially as you become more senior. There's often
yeah,
panels or groups of people or calibration or something. And then you may have to hit certain numbers. So if there's an end of year review process, you might have to be above average or some other score in order to be even considered for promotion. And this can be quite complex. And again, some people, in my experience, can be a bit negative about that whole process and feel that it's stacked against
yeah,
them, or it's sort of rigged, or some version of that. And my experience, certainly from having been on quite a few of those panels, is generally that's not true. And promotions are quite hard to get right 100% because there will always be a little bit of subjectivity in it, as much as you try to take it
yeah,
out. But people
yeah,
will try hard to make it as objective as possible. So rather than thinking that it's rigged against you or that you might not, you might be disadvantaged, is again just try and figure out what those processes really are, who makes the decisions, what are the criteria, and you can even speak to either your manager or HR about it. My recommendation in the book actually is sit down
yeah,
with the right person in HR and just ask them to talk you through it and to really explain exactly how
yeah,
it works. And they'd normally be delighted because a lot of HR work is can be tricky and can be difficult and dealing with difficult people or some problems. So if you just say, look, all I want to know is how this process works, please help. People are often delighted to do that. So
I'm sure.
that's part one
Yeah,
is again, it's a bit boring, but it's just really understanding that well and then using what you've learned to your advantage in terms of, if you know it's certain number of people, then as you said, make sure those people know who you are and what you've done. If you need to hit certain scores, certain criteria, again, make sure that you know what those are. And if there's some gaps in what you need to hit, often there's a list of competencies that companies will look for, like analytics, strategy, people, those sorts of things. And being really clear on where you're perceived to be strong and where you perceive to be less strong, and then working on those gaps that you might have. So again, you can demonstrate that you've really taken those things into account, is also really important. So I think all that process part is worth investing into and really understanding how it works.
and I think if you do, essentially, like, that process is actually your
Mm.
friend, because that process will actually tell you how to get there. It will lay out the scoring and what each bit means, and what that particular section is measured against, and rather than, as you said, being kind of negative about that, or feeling that it's stacked against you, well, actually it's the opposite. It's actually there to try and make it as equal as possible, and to take, the fact that somebody likes you more than someone else kind of out of the process, ideally, and actually make it about the skills.
Or we can
I thought
compensate
that was
for
it.
that is the case. I mean, there might be
Yeah.
some of that of, I like this person more than the other person, but
And you're never going to get rid of it entirely. But yeah, it's, as you say, it's never going to be, there's always going to be that element of subjectivity.
yeah. And then the second part of the promotions thinking, and this is probably the most important career advice I've ever received, is if you want to have a certain type of role, then act like you're already in that role rather than waiting to get it. So my example was a few years ago, I wanted to be a director, have the sort of title of director in the company. And I was complaining, if you like, and going, "Wow, if only I had that title, I could do all these things and I could be more strategic and I could make these decisions." And then my boss at some point said to me, "If you want to be a director, then act like one." And I thought, what does that mean? And actually, with hindsight, it's the best advice, which basically just means whatever next level you'd like to get promoted to, don't wait to be given that role before you act like that role, but actually start behaving as if you were already there, because that will make the decision at the end a lot easier. Because what you ideally want in this decision-making meeting is if someone says, "Oh, Matthias should be promoted to this level," everybody else goes, "Oh, I thought he already was at that level," because that's how he'd been acting. Then it's the easiest decision ever. It can feel a bit scary sometimes because you might think, "Oh, am I really allowed to make these decisions or act in this way or lead this meeting, whatever?" And again, you have to feel your way into it. But often you are allowed to do that, and people just accept that you're now doing it the way you're doing it. So you just have to give it a go. But I think stepping up to that new level before you're given the promotion is the best way of getting there ultimately. So yeah, that's my number one advice. Is already step up before you get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also totally part of that, but I guess the thinking behind that. So when you're looking at challenges or problems or whatever's coming to you day to day, adjusting your thinking so that you're not looking at it from the level that you were at. You're looking at it from that next level up of, well, what are the things that are actually important here, and kind of changing the way that you approach things more broadly.
Indeed, and back to proactivity. Sorry, just briefly, there will be opportunities for you to be proactive here as well, and step into leading certain meetings or writing certain papers or whatever it is, and just grabbing some of those opportunities, even if you feel that maybe they're a bit stretchy. Well, just give it a go and see if you can do that before.
It's the old, well, it always gets attributed to Richard Branson. I don't know whether he actually said it or not, but the old say yes and then figure it out later.
Something like that.
If someone, offers you the opportunity or there is an opportunity, put your hand up, say yes, and then work out how you're going to do it afterwards. I think it kind of goes hand in hand with that proactivity one, assuming he said something like that, but I think it was him. The other topic that I wanted to touch on, because it is something that I think is just coming up kind of more and more at the moment, is around stress and how you sort of find balance, particularly, I mean, it affects a lot of people, but particularly in some of those more senior roles where, you're getting more and more pressure for more and more outcomes. How do you manage that, and what have you found that's kind of worked for you?
Yeah, so look, the first thing I'd say is it's not easy, right? Stress can be a great thing because it drives you on, and a little bit of stress is a good thing because it pushes you, right? But too much stress clearly can push you over the edge and can have all sorts of negative consequences. So it's definitely not easy. So there's two things I'd say. The first one is that balance. I think if you recognize those two competing parts, and if you make sure there's sort of proactively try and make sure there's a reasonable balance, I think that's the first step. And when I say two competing parts, is on the one hand, you have to be confident in yourself that you're doing the right thing and that you're good at what you do. And remember that if there is stress and if people put pressure on you, that's probably because they have high expectations of you. And there's a quote called "pressure is a privilege," which is written on a tennis court in the US somewhere. And it's true to some extent. So if people give you lots of work and ask you to do many things and have high expectations, that's because they expect you, they think you're quite good or very good.
They think you can do it.
So take that as a compliment. Find somewhere in yourself that comfort or that strength that actually you are very good at what you do. On the other hand, you also want to make sure you keep getting better and you keep looking out for the new thing and you keep solving problems and so on. So it's a sort of version of something called the Stockdale paradox, which is at the same time you have to be 100% convinced that you're going to get there because you're amazing. But at the same time, you also have to be 100% convinced that there's loads of problems that you need to fix right now. And so you have to try and have these two things not be too much out of kilter, because clearly, if you think you're too amazing and you become overconfident, that's going to be a recipe for trouble. But if you fall too far the other way and think, oh my God, this is all too much, I can't go with it, then that's the trouble the other way. So find some way of balancing that out. And particularly, I think the key is to remind yourself that actually you are very good at what you do by and large. Think of, write down or keep somewhere the good work that you've done. Remind yourself that people give you compliments and praise and that you've delivered good work. I think it's coming back to that inner strength when it becomes all a bit too much, and remind yourself that ultimately the reason it is a bit much is because people think that you're good at what you do. But it's finding that balance as always. And then the second bit, I think, which is maybe even more important, is remind yourself that you're not alone in this thing. So there's a chapter in the book called You're Not the Only One Who Can't Sleep at Night. And it's 100% true. So you might sit there, hopefully it's not getting as far as not being able to sleep at night, but maybe sometimes that happens. And you sit there and you go, oh God, I can't sleep, or it's too much, or I'm waking up because of this presentation. And initially you think, oh, it must be just me. Everyone else is coping, right? It's this sort of part of the imposter syndrome bit as well. It's like, oh, I'm the only one who can't cope with this. Everyone else is doing great. I can guarantee you that is not true. Everyone else is not doing great. 90% of other people will have very similar sort of reactions or stress moments to you. So if you can find yourself somebody at work or a friend, but preferably somebody else at work, and you start opening up a little bit, you don't have to tell them all your things, but just if you come into work, if someone says, how you doing? Instead of going, yes, I'm great, you go, you know what? Actually, I feel a bit tired because I couldn't sleep that well last night because this is on my mind. You'll be amazed how quickly the other person will go, oh yes, that happens to me all the time as well. And this happened to me the other day. And very quickly you're down an interesting road of discussion and a bit of sort of mutual help, because I can, as I said, guarantee you're definitely not the only one. It happens to pretty much everybody in different ways at different times. Yeah. So you just have to find a way to take strength from those two things. Not that it's easy. It's never particularly easy if you want to be a high achiever, but yeah, you're not the only one, and you are actually very good at what you do. So remind yourself of that when it gets tough.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? I've had conversations like that with many people over the years, and I'm trying to think if I've ever met anyone who has not said some version of that. I actually can't think of someone who's just been like, oh no, it's just, water off a duck's back. Everyone has had, some version of that, but I think it's very easy to kid ourselves that, as you say, it's just us, that we're the only ones that are struggling. And I think it is one of the things I was going to say in the modern world. That's a terrible turn of phrase, but I can't think of another way of saying it, that it has become so much more normalized to talk about those things and to say, even the fact that, imposter syndrome has just become something that people talk about much more openly and readily. And I think that can only be a good thing, that people are more open to say, we're not all perfect, and we're not all just cruising along. Yeah. That, as you said, some of these jobs are really hard, and some of the decisions and the things that you've got to deal with aren't easy, and that's kind of what comes along with it. But yeah, having those open conversations. Can you think of anyone that you've ever kind of asked that question with, and they've just looked blankly at you and gone, "Oh no"?
Well, some people still don't particularly like talking about it, right? And opening up. So
that's different.
It depends who it is, but I still think even those people will have some moments, most likely. I'm sure. And the other thing, probably just to add on this area, is also saying no to things occasionally, which might feel quite hard and be a bit weird. But again, if you're very good at what you do, people will ask you for more things because they know that you can deliver. And if you keep saying yes to everything because you want to please people and you want to, you feel bad about saying no, that's going to make it harder, right? So occasionally you do need to also just find a way to say no, or say yes, but I can do it next week, or some other version of that. Because if you keep loading yourself up with ever more things to do, then it's just going to get harder.
Yeah, 100%. I actually had that conversation with a client a couple of weeks ago, saying, one of the things that's a part of her sort of value proposition is that she's really delivery focused, results focused, like always gets it done. And that's a huge positive for her. But the flip side is that people come to her with more and more stuff. And at this point in time, she wasn't great at kind of setting boundaries around that. And as you say, kind of saying no to some things. But it's a good skill to,
Yeah,
good skill
it's
to
not easy. I mean,
cultivate, that
I've
one.
got a chapter in there called
No, it's not.
"Strategy is deciding what not to do," which is one of my
Not to do.
one of my
Yeah.
favorite sayings. Because if your strategy is I'm going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, then is that really a strategy?
Not really a
I
strategy.
think it's the hard bits that's going, you know what, these bits over here, they're quite sensible, but we're just not going to do them because we just can't do everything at the same time. So that also applies in a micro
Yeah.
way to yourself, I think.
Yeah. Final question, Matthias. The time goes very quickly, and it's always the final question, and that is, what do you know now that you wish you knew then?
So I've thought about this a little bit because you did ask me in advance. And for me, I think it's around your value proposition as a person and the specialization that should be in that. So let me explain a little bit. So as I said at the beginning, I would consider myself to be a commercial generalist, which means that I could put my hand to quite a lot of different things and be quite good at them, I would think. Which is lovely because it gives me lots of options even now. And looking at practically at my next role after this book is that there's quite a few different types of things that I'm looking at. However, as you progress in your career and as you get a bit older, I suppose, I think it is actually valuable to have a slightly narrower value proposition. So when you start out, try out different things. Some might work, some might not. That's fantastic. But I think as you get into your, say, 30s, late 30s, is really be very clear or clearer on what is your specific value proposition and to narrow it down to specialize into an area that is yours to own. And that could be literally anything. I'm a biotech salesperson. I'm a digital marketing expert, whatever it is. Because as you progress, companies at the end of the day are pyramids of some sort. And therefore there are fewer senior jobs available than junior jobs. That's just life. So if you want to get one of those more senior jobs, you will be competing. It'll be harder to compete because there'll be more people for the number of roles or fewer roles for the people. So there will be some people who are specialists for each of those roles. And if you come in a bit like me and go, well, I could do this, then people might look at you and go, well, I'm sure you could, but I have this other person over here who's done it 3 times before and who's a big specialist in this area. So therefore I'm going to give it to them instead of you. So it's a bit of a long-winded way, but I think as you progress, if you haven't done it already, you might have been lucky, you might have already chosen something early on, and that's fantastic. But if you haven't, certainly in your 30s, I think just really start a little bit honing in on a specialism that you can then really develop and create your value proposition around. I think that would be my advice to myself from 20 years ago, I guess, that I might have done that a bit earlier than I have.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. It's a subject I could talk to you for hours about, but in the interests of time, I won't. But yeah, thank you. And as I said to you, I think before I pressed record, I really enjoyed the book and really easy to read, very practical, very funny. So I'll pop links in the show notes to your LinkedIn profile, and I'll pop some details in there about the book as well if people want to check it out.
Great, fantastic. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it as well. So thanks very much.